מכיר את זה.
Okay, we're recording.
They're teaching on good. You guys were training 3 times a week. My son,
And he smokes 3 joints a week.
I'll tell you what's amazing, and a place in Orange Grove.
Yeah, there it is. Lamed Tes Amud Aleph in the middle. And let's just Lamed Tes. Yeah, no, we're moving.
This was the little dog sleeping on his head. You see, you're picking him up the bed. Have your wife sleeping to him?
39A2. Yeah, 30. And if you've got an art scroll, the English side of art scrolls 39A2, right hand side towards the bottom. Mishnah listed another item of an idolater that's forbidden for consumption, a grain of chiltis. Whose is this?
מה זה חילבה?
Chiltis. Okay, is everybody ready? Are we having anybody in mind tonight? Anybody in mind for your sites? Let's see, I did have one over here.
How's it, Aubrey? Salam alaikum. Good to see you.
Sorry?
How's it been?
Riel ben Edna. Riel ben Edna.
You okay?
Riel ben Edna. I'm looking over here at mine.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you. That's awesome.
Tanya Bat. Daya. Tanya Bat Huda Margalit for a first Shleimer.
There's Chaya.
I see you coming up very soon. Tomorrow's is your side. Yes.
You know, but
20th of 7. 27, that's like in 3 days. What's tonight is 17, is that right? Tonight is,
Chaya.
what is tonight? 17th?
17th of Sivan.
It could be 17.
Yeah, tonight is already 17. Tuesday 17, Wednesday 18, Thursday 19. It's Friday. Then it's Friday, Thursday night, Friday.
Chaya al Basharon. She went in for minor procedure and she's been in ICU for 4 months.
Refuah Shleima. Refuah
And
Shleima.
Moshe, Ariel Bas, Chava.
Moshe Ariel Ben Chava. Moshe Ariel is Ben
Ben
Chava.
He's, you know who that is? Rabbi Goldberg. You know, his vertebra collapsed.
Rabbi Goldberg.
No, he had an accident a couple of years ago, messed up his whole vertebra, and the whole vertebra collapsed. He went in for pneumonia. The whole vertebra collapsed. He's been in ICU for about 2 months.
In Morningside. Sure, Refuah Shleima. Refuah Shleima.
And she's also in Morningside.
Yeah.
Chaya al Basharon.
Wow.
He was highly recommended.
Too much stuff in the world.
And he was very a lot. This poor girl's been in ICU for 5 months. She had about 20 hours.
Okay, everybody, we're going to start from these words, Kodet Shel Chiltis, which we did, you'll recall them because we did read these lines last week towards the end. These are a few lines that we read towards the end. We're just picking up on them again for a bit of chazara and a bit of context to catch the context. It was a Dibur HaMaschil. It was a quotation that came from the Mishnah that we had a few pages ago. The Mishnah had listed out a number of different things that one is not allowed to eat if it comes from Gentiles. So in other words, there's certain things you were able to buy and eat, even if it was produced by Goyim, and certain things that the Tanoim in the Mishnah listed and said, no, you can't buy them from Goyim. And one of the things the Mishnah listed was V'hakoret shel chiltis, slivers or slices of a certain kind of spice called chiltit. Anybody know what it is in English, in modern English?
We Googled it and we found it.
Yeah.
week.
Yeah.
Was in English.
Which spice? Which herb?
But not
Yeah.
a fish.
Mm. It was a sharp herb, according to this. Yeah.
No, it was. It is asafoetida or something. Yeah.
Saffotita.
Yeah.
Sure. English. What are they? Wow. A saffotida. Southern Iran. I don't know if we'll get any of these. Grows in southern
of-
I
Iran.
don't know if we left there anything.
Full of uranium. It's a
Full of
fruit
uranium.
plant, Rabbi, is it a fruit plant?
But apparently it's a sharp plant. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, because that's why it's a problem.
That's why it's a problem, because it's
The
sharp.
moment that it's
Va'akeret shel
sharp,
chiltis, slices or slithers of chiltis. My timer, what's the reason that it was outlawed in the Mishnah? Why can't you and I buy slices of chiltis from non-Jewish suppliers? Meshum, because the mafseka labor sakina, because they cut it with their treif knife, or their knife that they've used to cut other things. And our question immediately is, so what's the difference if they used the knife? Because anyways, if there was something non-kosher on the knife, surely that non-kosher residue should mess up whatever you're cutting. And the sage had said, the master had said, the Gemora is going to say, noisen tam lepgam is not a problem if the taste that comes into the kosher thing, what's it called, is to the detriment of it, it messes it, then it's not a problem. However, the reason this is a problem, the Gemora explained, is because the chiltis is sharp. In other words, think it's like, it must be like spicy, it's charif, it's like either garlic or a hot chili. So what it does is it has an effect on the meat residue, the non-kosher residue or oily residue on the knife, causes that to get sweeter, and then that comes back and flavors the chiltis. It's like a circular problem. It has a positive effect on the residue, and then the residue has a positive effect on the chiltis. So Afal gav the Omar Mar, even though that the master, that the sage had already said, Noisein tam lipgam mutar, that a substance, a non-kosher substance that gives a taste lipgam to the detriment, it sends it downwards, it's not a good taste, and it's not a problem, it's mutar. Here we have a problem. Agav, because hurfei de chiltisa, because of the sharpness of the chiltis, agav hurfei de chiltisa, because you can hear the word charif in hurfei, but it's Aramaic, but Aramaic and Hebrew are very similar. Agav hurfei de chiltisa, because of the sharpness of the chiltis, it sweetens this treif oil residue, the oily meat residue that's on the knife gets sweetened. And it becomes like something that gives a improving taste, not a detrimental taste, but an improving taste. And therefore becomes prohibited. So this is basically the Gemara explaining why the Mishnah would have outlawed the chiltis that the Goyim cut, and obviously it would apply to anything similar.
So if it detracts, it's okay. And
If it detracts, it's okay.
improves,
If it improves, it's not. But in this case, it's tricky because it should technically detract because it's a difficult kind of residue. But what happens is the sharpness of the chiltis has a positive effect on the residue, the treif residue, which then in turn has a positive effect as an ingredient in the chiltis. So therefore, the Mishnah said you can't buy chiltis from Goyim. You can only buy chiltis from Jews. Oh, wow. Welcome, Ray. Everybody here, Ray. Yeah.
fine, okay.
Baruch haba.
Welcome. So you have to know. You have to know from where.
Everybody that's
Sorry.
You know,
Yeah. We daven together.
okay.
Yeah. He's asking if I know you're.
Lachan.
Yeah.
The first time in Geneva, Lachan.
So that's right.
Smaller.
It's not a good drink.
Smaller.
Which Nusach be
Have you
done?
got decent whiskey though?
Let's test if I know
Which
name.
Nusach be
Rail.
done? Oh, we will bring you the food just now.
Rail, it's
Rabbi's
Mark, Melvin. Some guys you probably know from that show. Mark,
Who's very
Melvin, Yossi, as in DJ. Yossi, sir. Ephraim, you must know from Rabbi Hefe's shul, Effie.
Yeah, I've seen him before.
Benji, Steve, Michael,
Benji.
Saul, Alan, Jeff, you know, Shimon,
Tom,
Aubrey.
Oh,
Did I do everybody? I think so.
hello everybody. Hello. Thank
Which
you.
Nusach be done? That's all.
Which Musa?
Nusach.
You want further?
Safari.
What have we done? Safari. L'chaim, L'chaim.
Thank you. Where's your whiskey?
That's what's great for this glass.
No, you said I've got to have L'chaim. It's the host, you got to have L'chaim with me.
He's gonna be Rabbi.
Bring them on and give him.
Mine doesn't need it. Mine doesn't need it. Almost here, I'm bending.
Okay, back in the books, everybody. So therefore, chiltis, which is a sharp spice, you have to know who you're buying it from because you can't buy it from everybody. It has to be bought from a trusted source. In other words, the Gemora is saying that because you're not allowed to buy chiltis from a Gentile, if somebody's selling it, it's a type of spice we're talking about, you have to know where they got it. What is the source? So the Gemora tells a story. We're getting some lessons here that are anecdotal. The Gemora tells a story. Avdei de Rabbi Levi have a komazabin chiltisa. Rabbi Levi's servant would sell chiltis. Rabbi Levi had a servant, and the servant would sell chiltis. Now, the reason why you could trust that this chiltis came from a good source, a kosher source, was because it was Rabbi Levi's servant. Rabbi Levi's servant could be trusted, the point the Gemara is making, just like he himself could. In those days,
We're doing Chazorah now.
so yeah, we did read this. We did, that's right. We did the last week as well. Yeah, it means you're awake. Yeah. So, after the Rabbi Levi have come Zabin Chiltisa, the way it worked in the days of old was that if the person of the household was trustworthy, then their wife and children would be considered on the same level of trust. That's what the Gemara wants to affirm over here. And even the servants of the household who were considered part of the household would be considered as trustworthy as the balabas.
So amazing.
So
Amazing.
that was when Rabbi Levi was alive. When Rabbi Levi passed away, they didn't know, can we continue to trust his servants and buy chiltis from him? The fact that he was trustworthy when Rabbi Levi was alive, is he still trustworthy to give us only, and we could even be talking about a Jewish servant over here. We're talking about somebody who's supplying chiltis, and we don't know if he got it from a kosher source or not. But the fact of the matter is, when Rabbi Levi was alive, it was okay. When Rabbi Levi passed away, they wanted to know if they could continue to trust the servant.
Said, yes.
Maybe if the boss is dead,
He
then...
didn't have wife.
Sorry?
He didn't have wife, maybe. His wife is
So in this case, that's a good question you asked, because in the next paragraph, it's going to talk about trusting the wife. But here it's talking about the servant. I'm not sure about Rabbi Levi's wife. It's a good question where she was. But he wasn't around. And the shaila is, can you trust the servant after he's not around? When Rabbi Levi passed away, they came in front of Rabbi Yochanan. They brought their question to Rabbi Yochanan. Amrulay, they asked him, Mahu, what's the ruling? Lemizban minay, to buy chiltis from Rabbi Levi's servants. You know, it's like sometimes the Beth didn't give a stamp. And then you hear, sadly, unfortunately, we had to remove the hechsher. So, is the hechsher still valid? The rabbi's gone. Is the trust still there? Amalahu, Rabbi Yochanan answered them, Avdei shel chaver harehu kachaver. The servant of a chaver is the same as a chaver. Just like you trusted him when Rabbi Levi was alive, you can trust him even now that Rabbi Levi is not alive. Sorry? He's going to talk about it. The Gemora will ask the same question. But the idea is like this. There was in those days. Now, we don't like to make differences, but you know, people use certain terms in the world. You hear the term in Israel a lot. It's not always a positive term. You hear the term Haredi used sometimes. which means somebody that like chared, I think literally means to tremble or to fear God.
Yes.
You in Yiddish, there's a term frum. People will say, is he frum? That means, is he observant? Does he care about mitzvot or whatever? Now, the truth of the matter is, there are times in life where one needs to know the trustworthiness of a person. Can you eat? Can't you eat? Generally speaking, by the way, if you can avoid it, it's better not to have to label Jews, because everybody has their ups and everybody has their downs. So it's always relative, exactly. You can have some people that are very meticulous in some areas and sadly not in others. You can have people who, God forbid, present as God-fearing Jews, and you wouldn't want to have to trust them. I mean, it sadly has happened again and again. So the truth of the matter is, labels in a way are a little bit tricky. That's the truth of the matter. But the fact is, that's the way the world works. We people, so we make labels, and as vulnerable as labels are, we sometimes use them. So in the same way as we have labels nowadays, in those days they had labels. And the label they used to use was this word chaver. Chaver literally means a friend or a colleague.
Chaverim.
But like the word chaverim. But what they really meant when they said chaver, a chaver was a person who was known, who had a record to be serious or meticulous about Torah law, and especially laws to do with things like kashrut, tumah v'tara, ritual purity, ritual impurity, shmita, maisa. So the idea was, if somebody said to you that such and such a person is a chaver, in those days it meant you could eat there without worry. You know, if a person was, the Gemora is going to talk a bit later on about, it will use the word in the Talmud, believe it or not, word Am Haaretz. Am Haaretz literally means a regular person, person of the land. But in this context, the commoner. But in the context that the Gemora is going to present it in a few paragraphs' time, it is a bit pejorative. It means somebody who either doesn't know or doesn't care. So you have to be a bit more careful, because if he gives you fruit in Eretz Yisrael or vegetables, maybe he didn't take Truma and Maisa. You have to do the Truma and Maisa yourself. Yeah. If he cooked something, how do you know that he knew what he's doing? So, but a chover was the expression for somebody who was, how would you call it, God-fearing, and you wouldn't have to check further. If somebody had a status of a chaver, you could use his chiltis, like it says here. And the other example that the Gemora is going to bring, we spoke about chiltis last week, but the Gemora is also going to say that you can use his techeles, his blue dye. You know, in the Torah it says that the tzitzis, the one string has to be a string of techelet, of blue. And okay, according to most opinions, it's difficult to get the accurate techelet today. There are some, but most of observant from jury today don't use techelet. But once upon a time they did.
Rabbi Rabenovich used to have it.
And one of the interesting things about techelet was that it's something that's easy to fake. In other words, you can't tell that techelet came from a particular snail called a chilazon. There was a snail called a chilazon, and it was a certain secretion from this kind of snail which they used, and it was processed in a special kind of way, and you had to know for sure that the people that made it were God-fearing, because there were other ways to create this color. It wasn't from the color itself. Even if you were a color expert, you know, like some people are experts at shades. They can tell you they can tell you, like, you know, women with clothes and whatever, sometimes they'll tell you, by us, you know, red is red. They can give you like 100 different shades, from maroon all the way to, I don't know what, a Persian red and a maroon and a this and a that. So there are people that are mumchim, or experts in different color shades. But the thing with the techelet was that it was very easy to mimic the exact same shade, but it wouldn't be kosher because it didn't come from the right source. So with techelet also, you needed a chaver. You needed to know who are the people who made this dye, and do they know what they're doing? Did they take the correct animal? Did they source it in the correct place? And did they produce it the correct way? So the next thing is
a note here on this Amar. You can't buy filters from a.
That you can't buy filters from a.
Yeah,
exactly. And it's going to come about from the Gemora.
Servant,
but not from
No, because the servant of the chaver is like a chaver, whereas the Am Haaretz himself is not trustworthy.
He doesn't know.
Yeah. Rav Huna bar Manyumi. So the Gemara tells another story Rav Huna bar Manyumi Zovan Tchelto me Anshe de Bacher de Rav Amram Chasida. Rav Huna bar Manyumi went and bought the chelet, the sky blue dye for his talis or tzitzis, from the people of the household of Rav Amram the pious. And the people of the household, the Gemora's commentators say, means basically his wife. He wasn't around, and they bought it from the wife of Rav Amram the pious. Rav Amram was pious, but what about the rest of the household? Could you trust them? So Rav Huna bought it. You know, there's that old expression, buy now, ask later. Do it now and ask questions. So the money he spent, he bought the chelet from Rav Amram Chasida's wife, but he hadn't used it yet. He wanted to know, can I use it for the mitzvah of my tzitzis? So he went to ask Asal Kama de Rav Yosef. He went to present his question in front of the sage Rav Yosef. What do I do? It was the woman of the house of Rav Amram Chasida. She sold me to chelet. Good or bad? What should I do? So the Gemora says, Lehava b'yadei. Rav Yosef shrugged his shoulders. Sorry, buddy, I haven't got an answer for you. He himself would have been okay. Is the wife okay? I can't tell you. He didn't know the answer. So the Gemora continues the story. Could be. Let the Gemara tell the story. You could. Haga by Chanan Chayata carried on his trip. He didn't have an answer. He met Chanan the tailor. You know, tailors know a lot about tzitzit and talis. And Haga by Chanan Chayata. He met Chanan the tailor, and he obviously told him, well, I've got this problem. I spent some money. I put my credit card in the machine. I spent some money. I bought the tailors from the wife of Rav Amram, the pious one. And now I don't know if I can use it. So he said to him, Amalei. First he said to him, Yosef, on your Manole, the poor Rav Yosef, where would he know the answer from? That was the first thing he said. Why did you go to Rav Yosef? How Rav Yosef, the poor one, how would he know the answer? The commentators ask on the story, the question, why did he make a comment like that? So apparently Rav Yosef, sadly, when he got older, he ran into certain troubles, and he had memory loss and various different troubles, and he wasn't in a position to answer a question well, sadly, even though he was once a sage. This is what happened. So the first question was, why did you go to him? He can't answer you. But then he said, and this is an expression that you often have, you hear people using it. He said, but did he have a uvda? I had that exact story. You know, when someone says to you, I can answer you because I was in that boat. But did he have a uvda? I had exactly the same story as you. What happened to me? I bought chelet from the household of the wife of Rab Noah, who was the brother of Rav Chia bar Abba. Rav Chia bar Abba had a brother called Rabbi Noah, and Rabbi Noah also, when he was not around, his wife carried on selling chelet, and I said this tailor bought chelet from his wife, and I had the same problem. So in the beginning, the story sounds exactly the same, a copy-paste, but he does get to a conclusion. First, I went to Rav Matana. He too had no answer. He couldn't help me. Then I came to Rav Yehuda from Hagronia. Omali, he said to me, Nafalta layad, you fell in the right place. In other words, I'm the man that can help you. Yeah, I can help you. I've got the answer. And he said the answer is, everything in those days was also by tradition. The generations, so the person who remembered the tradition from the higher teachers, from the original sources, that's who could help you. So he said, Hache Amar Shmuel, this is exactly what the sage Shmuel taught. Shmuel taught this already. Shmuel said, Aishes chaver harahika chaver. The wife of a person with the status of a chaver is also considered like a chaver. In other words, if her hubby was a chaver, so is she. If you could have trusted him and bought the chelet from him, you can trust her. So therefore, the chelet that you bought from Rav Amram the pious's wife is good, and the chelet that I bought from Rav Noah's wife is also good. It's fine, no problem. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes more, especially when it has to do with the kitchen. Yeah.
Just give him the shit.
Let me tell you, the funny thing is when it has to do with something in the kitchen, you take complex things like the laws of how to deal with cooking. Once Shabbos starts, cholent, it's fully cooked, it's partially cooked. Take it off the blech, mix it. You can't mix it when you can take off the lid, because there's certain times that if you take the lid off the pot, then you might be causing it to cook. So you're not allowed to take it off until it's a certain amount cooked. And what happens if you need to add hot water on Shabbos because your cholent is a bit dry? So you got to
made.
so you never know. No. Listen, it happened. No, absolutely, it happened to
Remember,
when
the servants know as well.
yeah. My mother had exactly that. When my mother came to South Africa, she came originally from the United States, and she came from America as a young brain. In those days, the butcheries weren't as advanced as today, and sometimes people used to actually have to kasher their own chickens in the 60s, in the early 70s. You could get chickens from the butchery, and you had to bring them home. They were shefted, but they weren't kashered. And she was
used to shop in the book to see what was kosher.
And she was kashering I think it was a chicken, and it was missing. I might get my biology a little bit
One leg.
it was missing, I think, the gallbladder. I think it was missing. There was a part inside that it was missing. Yeah. And she didn't know what to do. And my father had a lady that worked for the family for many years. Her name was Mary. And Mary said to my mother, this is what you have to do. You have to lick the liver. And if the liver's bitter, it means that was absorbed in the liver. It's fine. If the liver tastes bitter, then it's okay. And my mother looked at her like, where are you coming from? And what do you know? And then she phoned. In those days, the Rav in the town in the early 70s was Rabbi Zaltz's father. Rabbi Yossi Zaltz down the road. So his late father was he was the original rabbi of the Yekka community, and he was the main halachic posek in those days. So my mother phoned him and she said, what do I do? And he said, you lick the liver. And if you lick the liver, and she said to my mother, you see, I told you. So I mean, it's not a joke. Sometimes if a person works in a kosher kitchen for many, many years, they know a lot. They know a lot. There's no question.
How many poisics are there today? There must be plenty.
What's that?
Poisics.
Plenty. Rabbis that paskin, there's plenty. In those days, it was a very small from community. Anyway, let's just read a few more lines. Tanaina laha, the Tanu Rabbanon. So the Gemora says now, what you're saying, all these stories, we actually learned in a brisa. In other words, there's a source or original passage which tells us exactly this situation. What does it tell us? There's a brisa that's a passage, a quoted passage of the Tanoim, which says, "Aishes chover harahi kachover." The wife of a chover has the same status as a chover. You can trust her too. Avdei shel chover harayu kachover. The servant of a chover is also like a chover. Chover shemais. If a chover passes away, Ishto Yubanav uvnei Veisai, his wife, his children, and his household, Hareihen b'chezkason, they remain in the presumptive state, the chazaka, ad sheyechajdu, until God forbid they are known to be unscrupulous. In other words, if there's no reason to believe that they did anything otherwise, you're allowed to continue believing that if the father was the person who led the household was trustworthy, then the rest of them are also. Unless, God forbid, it gets out that they don't care as much as he did. V'chayin, and likewise, chotzer, if you have a courtyard means, these homes opened up into a courtyard, so that would be like where the tuck shop counter was or whatever, the vending place. If you have a courtyard, shemoichrin bat cheles, that family sold to cheles, everybody had their, how would you call it, their career, their way to make a living, their trade. So if this family had a trade that they sold to cheles, you don't have to worry if the head of the family is, God forbid, gone or not. If that courtyard had a chazaka that they were trustworthy for proper techelet, sky blue dye, then harehein bechet kasan, they remain with that chazaka ad sheti pasel, until, if God forbid, you hear something wrong, but you don't have to send mashgichim and you don't have to do checks. You're allowed to presume good until you hear otherwise. Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, what happens, Aishes Amaretz, the wife of an Amaretz, means somebody who is not scrupulous. Shenisus Lachaver, she was married to an Amaretz, something happened to him, and now she goes and marries a Chaver. She either divorced him or she was widowed from him, and she marries a Chaver. V'chein bitoy shel Amaretz, the daughter of an Amaretz shenisus lechaver. V'chein avdoi shel Amaretz, or the servant of an Amaretz shenimker lechaver, that becomes part of the household of a chaver. Kulan tzrichin lekabel divrei chaverus. They need to accept upon themselves the status of chaverus. In other words, it doesn't automatically move from one place to another. The fact that she was married to a chaver, if she goes and marries someone who isn't, unfortunately, that status doesn't move. Aval Aishes Chaver Shenisus LaAmaretz, the other way around, the wife of a Chaver that marries an Amaretz, V'chein Bitu Shel Chaver Shenisus LaAmaretz, the daughter of a Chaver marries an Amaretz, V'chein Avdu Shel Chaver Shenimkel Amaretz, Einon Tzrikin LaKabel Divrei Chaverus LaKatchila Divrei Rabbi Meir. According to Rabbi Meir, they don't have to accept upon themselves the stringencies of Chaverus. In other words, it's automatic. The fact that they originally were the wife or the daughter or the servant of a Chaver, that status stays with them even if they move to another household that's not as scrupulous. Rabbi Meir says it's automatic. Others say, no, it's not automatic. They have to actually accept upon themselves. They have to stand in front of the rabbis or the Beis Din and say, I still am scrupulous, and I have to make a declaration. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, they have to accept, call it a declaration of chaverus lechatchila, because she was once married to a chaver and now she isn't. If she wants to retain that trusted status, she has to say, you can still trust me. I'm as scrupulous as I was in a home where I was married to a chaver. I might have moved to a home that's not as trusted, but me, in terms of my own scruples, I haven't changed. But according to Rabbi Meir, she doesn't have to make that declaration. According to Rabbi Yehuda, she does. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said, I can illustrate this with a story. There's a story of a woman, who was married to a chaver. When she was married to a chaver who was a pious person, she used to help him tie his tefillin on his hand. She then married a tax collector, and she tied the instruments of tax collection on his hand. Now, the illustration that he's making over here, in those days, the collection of tax was a very unscrupulous procedure. Because as today, but in those days, because what used to happen was the authorities, instead of going out and collecting the tax themselves, they didn't have computers and software and forms. So what they used to do was they'd contract it out to private people. They'd give private people agency that they could go and hound the masses for tax. And there was a whole hierarchy. Somebody would get the city, and then the guy that was in charge of the city would be allowed to collect from the different parts of the city. But it came out that because of the fact that they were all collecting, they were paid on commission. In other words, to make things efficient, they were paid commission on the tax that they collected, and they were very heavy-handed and conniving. And they got a reputation, you see, even in halacha, that they weren't the nicest people around. In other words, the private people that collaborated to collect tax were considered crooks and not nice people. Because of the way they did it, it wasn't. So what happens is, the illustration that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar is saying is, you had a woman that was married to a chaver. When she was married to him, she literally helped him put on tefillin. And then afterwards, she was married to a tax collecting crook, and she helped him do his naughty business. So basically, the fact that she was once married to a pious person, the point he's making is not a raya that right now she's pious anymore. Because of the fact, in other words, the principle is, they want to say that a woman will be very influenced. This might not be politically correct in the modern world, but the point they're making is a woman will be very influenced by the scruples of the man that she is married to. And therefore, if he's not so kosher, she won't be. And if he is, she will be. So that's they're saying that, therefore, when she was married to a chaver, she could be trusted. She wanted to be serious and scrupulous like he was. And when she wasn't, she wasn't. And therefore, the point is, that's why Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon Elazar say, you know what? She can continue that status, but she has to make a declaration. It's not automatic. It's not an automatic status. It comes about with a declaration. I'm still a chaver, or I think in strict Hebrew we'd say chaverai, and I am scrupulous in the observance of these mitzvahs, whatever the situation might now be. Okay, we can stop inside over there if anybody has any questions.
So it's interesting, it doesn't read a case in that story that when you're dealing with a servant or a daughter, it just talks about a wife.
It does. Oh, you mean it doesn't? Oh, you mean who moves to another?
It speaks about the servant and the.
But I think it applies to all. It applies. The only difference is a daughter can't move household. Her father's her father. A wife can divorce X or be widowed from X and become someone else's wife. A daughter can't become someone else's daughter, although she can become.
But you can marry.
But she can marry somebody else. Fair enough. She can marry an Amoritz. Exactly. So in other words,
can a son and a son-in-law have the same status as if he's
if they're in the household. So what it would seem from this is that when the household is one, they all get the status of the leader of the household. If we can trust the leader of the household, I mean, provided he has control of his household, you can have a patriarch that unfortunately maybe he's on in years and the younger generation are really in control. So if they're not moral and ethical, it doesn't help that he is.
It'll be a call for it.
Yeah. So you actually see it in the world. You see many cases where people run a business according to strict ethical business standards, and a new generation comes in. It's happened.
Yeah.
A new generation comes in, takes a business that parents ran under very strict ethical standards, and they don't mind doing naughty things. And the next thing, a place that had a reputation for honesty for many years is suddenly in the doldrums. It can happen. So the idea is, back to your question, if the patriarch has control, then his ethics and morals are of relevance. If not, then what does it help? They're going to come at the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to switch off the text. And if anyone wants to make a l'chaim. So yeah, we had just Les. The other Zooms were right here. Les is the only.
But usually women stronger than men. Women can make a man religious, but men can't make him religious.
Go ahead, Graham.
We're done with the teaching, Les. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to switch off. Okay, all the best. Shabbat tov, Byron.
I don't know,
Take care. Sorry.